What's up, world? How you doing? This is David Castillo. This is the age of quarantine. Happy Monday. How's it going? Hope everybody's surviving, doing well out there, having a good time. We have a very amazing guest with us today. Truly one of the more remarkable drummers I've probably seen in my fucking life. His name is Sebastian Thomson. He continues to be, in Trans Am. Also plays with Baroness, and also has a great solo project, more kind of in the kind of housey, post-punky dance world called Publicist. They should also check out. So, welcome, Sebastian, everybody. Great to see you. Let's get Sebastian on here. Favorite people to come and have a beer with at Saint Vitus. A lovely hang, truly. So we're just waiting on Sebastian, and we'll see where he's at in a second. Let's see. Did that not work? Let's try again. Uh-oh. We're having technical difficulties. Let's see if I can figure this out. Okay. Cool. So let's see if we can hook this up. Sebastian, if you're out there, it might be in the little feed here that we got going on. Sent you a request. I see that you're on here, so let me know if you have any questions. Guys, while we're waiting to see if we can get with Sebastian, is there anything that you're listening to particularly?
It's working.
Oh, hey, there
All right.
He popped up, my guy.
This worked.
Okay, we're here.
Am I the wrong way?
You're the wrong way.
God damn it.
Or maybe I could go your way. I don't know.
How's this?
Dude, you're perfect. You're
Well,
perfect.
then I gotta change. Hold on a second.
It's all good. This is a DIY talk show. We're having a good time. You know?
How do I do this? Let me see if I can. Oh fuck, man.
Dude, you had Jamie from Shoo Shoo just doing the handheld the whole time. He was switching arms. It was crazy.
If I can just do this.
Yeah. As long as I could see you, we're feeling good. I can see you. I can hear you. Sebastian, thanks for joining us, man.
My pleasure.
It's been so long, man. It sucks.
Been a long time.
For sure, man. So, Sebastian, here at the age of quarantine, we'd like to just go through people's journeys in music and just kind of start from the top. Since you're a kid, you have an amazing CV. I was just talking all about it. We span many genres and many places. So let's get into, where did you exactly grow up?
So I am from Argentina.
El Argentino. I got it.
Argentino. But we went and left multiple times. Basically, so Argentina has, unfortunately, a history of dictatorships, military dictatorships, and my dad being he was a professor, and being slightly politically involved, he was on the shit list.
Got it.
So I was too young to really understand what was happening, but his colleagues were being. So this is getting really dark, off the bat. So
tell me about your childhood. So we were fleeing military.
Yeah. So my dad's friends were getting put in jail and whatever and torture and all this fucked up shit. So we fucking took off. So I got to America at the end of around first grade is when I got to America the first time. So I did my elementary school in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, which is why my English is pretty much totally normal, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but when I first got to America, I had to go to whatever, English for, immigrant kids or whatever the classes were called. But so I grew up in the DC suburbs, elementary school. That was fun, whatever. And then we went back to Argentina when I did high school.
Uh-huh.
So I did all of my high school in Argentina. So then that was weird and awesome and bad and great at the same time. I mean, it's kind of a weird age, obviously, when you're starting high school. And on top of that, by the time I went back, now my English was good and my Spanish was kind of shitty, right?
Yeah, I love that. And they're like, "Where are you from?" You know, I
Right.
get it all the time.
And then after high school, I came back to America to do college, and then my Spanish was good and my English was shitty again. So it happened like multiple times, and every time I was like, you know, it was confusing, obviously.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because when I hear your story a little bit, it kind of reminds me of my older siblings a little bit. They had a little bit of back and forth before our family truly settled here, but between the Colombia and the States. So
Right.
when you were young, when did like music sort of enter the equation? What were you really attracted to, even when I was like a little kid? You know, like I honestly, for me, it was like 80s pop radio that my mom would just have on.
Sure.
And I'd start dancing like crazy, and I just loved it. And then later on, it would be, you know, and at that time, hair metal was on the radio too, you know?
Right.
So it was all of that sort of stuff. What was their earliest sort of memories of being drawn to music?
Well, the very furthest. So we also lived in Brazil for a little bit when I was a kid, and I do have a very vague memory of like the batucada drum school music, and I wasn't playing drums yet, but I remember just like being really fascinated with this music. And my brother has like shown me like slides of me as a little kid, just like on the street, like watching these people, just like totally fascinated. And I think it's somewhere deep down inside. But when I was a little bit older, like whatever, 6 or 7, I'm lucky enough to have an older brother who's 4 years older. And that's like, for a kid, a really good like music introduction, right? To have an older sibling who's a little bit older, who's cool enough to show you what's cool and what's not cool, right? And so then like, you know, stuff that's cooler than what your friends your age know about, right? So like you said, the first stuff was like, I mean, I remember the first band that I remember, like maybe the first 2 bands I remember being like, I like music and I'm a fan of this band, were The Cars and Hall & Oates.
Yeah.
But very soon after that, my brother was like, you know, he introduced me first of all to like metal early on. He was a huge Ozzy fan, and the first 2 solo Ozzy albums are a huge deal for me. Diary of a Madman and Blizzard of Oz I still listen to them. Randy Rhoads and Lee Kerslake and all that shit. I love that. Huge. Still to this day, I like play along to those songs and like learn those drum fills and stuff. Like that's still a big deal for me.
Iconic stuff, man.
Yeah, and then also, but my brother was the kind of kid like me too. Like he wasn't like a lot of music fans become really tribal, right? Where they're like, this is my identity. I'm a metal kid. I'm a punk. I'm into ska, whatever the hell it is, right? He wasn't really like that, and I wasn't really like that. So he would like bounce around from different like styles, and I, being the little kid, would just like listen to his records. So it was a very sort of like for example, okay, so after that, then he really got into like Bauhaus and Joy Division and like early Cure stuff, you know, like gothy stuff, and I thought that was fucking amazing. I loved it, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, he got into Kraftwerk, right? Like early on, like when like Computer World came out, right? And I was like, this is fucking incredible, right? Like this shit just blew my mind. I was a little kid, you know?
I think I'm in love with your brother. We need to get him on here too.
Yeah. I don't know if he's listening to this, but yeah.
What taste? But it really is amazing to see, you know, I've done so many of these, just who along somebody's path can just set them off in one direction. For you, it's a brother. Sometimes it's a neighbor, a kid in high school, a music person. So it's so cool.
And my folks were really, I love my folks, my mom and dad, but they weren't really like instrumental at all in that. I mean, yeah, like my parents, they played like violin. I played violin when I was a kid, but it was just like, it's sort of like a thing you did in school. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like, they didn't really sort of get my brother and our fascination with like pop music and rock bands. They were like, whatever, you know? And, I'm not saying that they were dismissive. I'm just saying like this, for them it was like, this is something that kids do. Is my point.
Yeah, like they kind of weren't so sure that you'd be on the journey that you ended up being in, you know, Baroness.
Well, that's another whole can of worms that we can get into later. But,
yeah, totally.
But yeah, so my brother was like, yeah, you know, and the cool thing is that then when I got older, and I started to discover, like, we still introduce stuff to each other to this day. You know, now that we're both mentally developed, you know, and we're not like 8 years old anymore, I can like introduce him to stuff. But yeah, so I wasn't playing drums yet. I started playing drums when I went to Argentina, and the reason I started was because I was the kid that spoke English the best in class because I had just gotten back from the U.S. And my buddies wanted to start like a cover band. And they're like, you're going to be the singer because you can sing in English. Right? And I'm not really a very good singer. But I was like, sure, whatever, cool. I'm like 14. And I'm like, yeah, I'll be singing in the band, whatever. And then the drummer would never show up to rehearsal. Right? So I would just sit down at the drum kit and just like go, do, 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 do. And after a couple months, we were like, maybe I should just be the drummer.
Amazing. I love that.
That was it.
It's so funny to me that these choices that happen in adolescence and that are so haphazard, they stick with people for so fucking long. Like, you know, we're talking about, to
kind of
me,
scary.
I just, you know, you're a great drummer and stuff, and it's so funny to just be like, hey, all right, cool. Like, because, you know, some kid in Argentina didn't show up to like a couple of band rehearsals, we get you as a drummer. So to whoever that is down in Argentina, muchísimas gracias.
Forgot his name, but yeah, so we just did, like, this was in the 80s. I'm old, so we were just doing lots of, like, the funny thing is we did a lot of Police covers, right? And I love the Police, and I fucking love Stuart Copeland. He's maybe my favorite drummer. And it's just funny to me to think about, like, when I'm like 15 and I've been playing drums for like 6 months, and I'm trying to do like Police covers. It's just like, I was just like doing like the most basic interpretation. It's just funny to think about that now. I don't have any recordings of that, but it just makes me laugh to think like how far off I was from what he was.
Steep mountain to climb, man. The youthful ambition. Was definitely prevalent. So it was just like, so you just picked up drums like kind of right on the spot in order to perform, kind of like right away.
Yeah.
When was the kind of transition? Because, you know, I know Argentina specifically, out of many Latin American countries, also had kind of a pretty deep scene of indie rock and stuff like that. If you go to the biggest Stereo and drilling on down.
Of course, I saw them live twice. Fucking love that shit.
And also, there's a great documentary on Netflix for Rompa Todo, really great. And also kind of charts a lot of the kind of same things that your family went through too. A lot of Argentines, political unrest.
Totally around and
So
when I was there, my favorite band at the time, if anybody is interested in doing some research, is called Sumo, like the Japanese wrestling. And it's like an Argentine, like, post-punk band, but because it's from the 80s, they also do, like, reggae and weird shit like that. And it's just, like, they're just, like, I love them because, like, they're, like, authentic weirdos. You know what I mean? Like, they're, like, you know, like, there's no, it's for real, you know? And it's, and they're just a bunch of fucking weirdos, which I love. That's kind of the best, you know?
Yeah, definitely. But it's cool that there was, like, because, you know, I feel like access and, like, looking at all that stuff, and I have a cousin, shout out to Carolina. Carolina would come from Bogota, and she'd show me stuff like that, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? Yeah. But it's cool. To me, it sounded like, like a Soda Stereo sounded like a U2-ish kind of, you know, post-punkish.
It's like U2 meets the Police meets Duran Duran.
Exactly. And I was just like, holy crap. And they sing in Spanish, but like,
they were pretty much first international Spanish language rock star band.
Definitely. Yeah, and that was.
And you know what I realized later on in life? This is for the Spanish speakers out there. I mean, you might know this. In Argentina, we say "vos" or "tú" for you, right?
Yeah.
But in most Latin America, people say "tú" instead of "vos." But in Soda Stereo, the lyrics, they say "tú," not "vos." And at the time, I didn't really think about it, but now it's like, oh, they were doing that intentionally so they could go tour in Colombia and Mexico and Spain, wherever. Because if you say "vos, que se boludo" like that all the time, like a real Porteño Argentine, it's like other people in Latin America, like, what? They're not going to get it. You know?
Totally.
They had to make it sort of like international.
Yeah, it's like, you know, even here, maybe like the regionalisms of like rap or something like that, you know,
Totally.
or whatever. When you bring that in, they were definitely shooting for mass appeal.
They were.
So you were actually kind of getting into some of this music when you were in Argentina and stuff, but then all of a sudden we're shifting gears back to DC for college, right?
Well, I did leave out one thing before we went to Argentina. Another band that my brother introduced me to is Manowar. When I was like 12 or 13, and that was like for a couple of years. That was like my band. You know, that was like, and so I'm just mentioning that because like the metal thing is like something in my life that comes and goes in phases, and that was an early phase of that, you know. But so I'm playing in bands in Argentina, and then for multiple reasons, my whole family, we decided to come back to America. Weirdly enough, I kind of didn't want to go back to America because Buenos Aires is an awesome city. You know, it's super fun. It's a big city. It's like, and when you're like, there wasn't a drinking age. I was like 17. The public transportation is great. I'm going to shows. I'm going to parties. And it was awesome. And then like going back to like DC suburbs was not really very exciting, you know. But whatever. Went back to America.
I can imagine.
Yeah, but in the DC suburbs, I met Phil and Nate, who are my bros from Trans Am. And I had met them briefly in junior high school, but then we met again, and they needed a new drummer, and we started playing, and then we became fast friends, and then what happened really is they introduced me to the DC hardcore theme, which was that was a big change for me. I remember the first time I saw Fugazi, and I think it was at Fort Reno, which was an outdoor concert series in DC. And it was mind-blowing because when I was in Argentina, punk rock was like scrappy. That was kind of the point. Like, you know, not being able to play was kind of the point, right? And then I saw Fugazi, and it was like, I had this like insane, intense energy and very righteous. I mean that in a good way, not like not trying to, you know, not derogatory way, but they could also really fucking play. And it was just like the whole thing was so like intense and mind blowing. And it was punk rock, but it had there was such a positive thing around it, you know. Everybody was like, we're gonna fucking change the world together, you know. And it was like, it was really overwhelming and crazy. And so of course we got, you know, inspired by that, and whatever sort of classic rock influences we had were sort of like started fading away, and we started doing more of, you know, we're listening to like Fugazi and Rites of Spring and Soulside and Bad Brains and all that kind of stuff. And that really started influencing us. And our first couple of releases, which were cassettes and 7-inches, were a lot like that. So that's what we were into. And the other really important thing, maybe even more so than the music, was here's something that maybe a lot of Americans take for granted, right? Like the idea of like there being like an underground DIY music economy that's in parallel to like mainstream stuff is something that a lot of other countries didn't have for a long time, and America kind of invented that, you know. And that the whole like chord thing and all that stuff, that was part of it. The American hardcore scene really had a big hand in creating that, and that's the first time where, you know, as a kid I realized, oh, you can buy a shitty used van and you can sleep on friends' floors, and you can tour around the U.S. and there's a network of independent promoters, and sometimes you're playing in bars and sometimes you're playing in church basements or whatever, and you can like survive on tour. And you don't have to be like a mega rock star to do this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it changes the mentality. I think that that's totally true. To me, when I discovered underground music, it started breaking down the barriers between what I thought I could do versus somebody else in positions that seemed of power or grandiosity, you know?
Yeah.
Like we could bring those things together and bridge that gap. And I think you're right. You read about Sonic Youth and Black Flag, and then, and obviously Henry's from GC originally, SOA, what's up? But, you get all of that, and you're right. In other countries, it took a lot of time to develop these sorts of networks and things, especially because communication isn't what it is now, right? Remember, book your own fucking life.
This is now I'm fast forwarding, but like, touring was you would drive in a van, you would have some printout from that you got sent in the mail, right, from the promoter with directions to get to the club, and then you'd have to pull over at a gas station and like put in a quarter and call it more and be like, we're on whatever street and we're lost, and like hopefully he or she was in the office at the time. You know what I mean? There's no cell phone. You don't have cell phones, whatever. It was an adventure. It really was like you were like Vikings going on a trip across the Atlantic. It was like totally. I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, no. I mean, I hear so many things like that, and it's super funny because you got it dialed in. Even like, I'm 37, and so my experience with a lot of music, like my arc kind of went as the internet grew. I grew up with it, like almost side by side. So like when I was a teenager, the internet was like prehistoric dial-up, like, and that happened when I was like 14 or so. But the time I was in college, it was kind of like that. So it's even funny for me seeing like MapQuest on like directions and stuff, and that was like technological, but you'd be in some library somewhere like, what the fuck is going on?
It was so different, man.
Definitely. But the fact that it even existed gave the ability for all of these like-minded people to create, right?
Yeah.
And that is really, besides the aesthetic gift of Fugazi, which they are a great band, it's the other aspects around it that like gave almost the blueprint, the platform for so many, right?
Totally. And I mean, I think America also has some advantages, which is, well, the first one is that it's such a big country that you can drive and you can play 20 big cities in America. There's very few countries where you can do that. I mean, in Argentina, you play Buenos Aires and La Plata and then Rosario, and maybe Córdoba. That's it.
Maybe Córdoba.
Maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not. It's like, and then like, well, let's talk about like a first world country like Australia, right? You do like Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, and that's it. Because then you got to fly to go anywhere else. You know what I'm saying? It's like America's sense. You can just drive around and play one city after another. So,
totally. And as long as you have some sort of audience for it, like you can kind of make it through. And I think they showed, in a way, it was almost like the backpacking vibe of like playing music and bringing it to that sort of way, a new bohemian context in a way, which is pretty amazing. So you're in the middle of that and you're feeling that, but Trans Am to me really transcends so much.
We quickly moved past, musically moved past that.
Yeah, like I feel like Minority did other things like the fringe DC bands. As far as like when I listened to Trans Am, from what I know Trans Am to be, which I really discovered you guys already when you were like way more in like crowdy, psyche, synthy vibes.
But we were always, that was always part of our thing. It's like, I think very early on, like going back to my brother's influence, like the Kraftwerk thing, like I introduced the other guys to Kraftwerk, and that kind of like blew everybody's mind, and like, so early on we were like, why don't we use some synths in what we're doing, and like, that seems like a really obvious thing now, but you gotta, like, in like the early 90s in the DC hardcore scene, that was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, and then there was also like, this will tie into the Publicist thing because, and just to clear up for anybody who's listening, I'm not a publicist. That is the name of my solo project, which I sometimes
Sebastian is much cooler than that. Okay,
I sometimes regret using. I still get messages. The one time a month I check Facebook, I still get messages like, "Oh, could you help me promote my new single?" You know, I'm like, dude, come on,
dude.
No, come on, look at my feet. Come on, dude.
Yeah, come on.
Look at my wall. Anyway, so, how was I saying? Oh yeah, so for example, that's also in the early '90s is when I got into like Aphex Twin, right, and stuff like that, and Plastic Man and shit like that, and that was like we kind of brought that into the Trans Am thing in the sense of like let's just do this is where the fuck we want was our attitude, and let's not worry about like is this cool or not, you know, like we, for better or worse, never cared about it whether it was cool or not. As long as we thought it was cool, we did it. So we would bring in these ideas, and like, for example, like there was such a weird attitude towards drummers back then.
So much. It was like you were cheating.
Totally. And I was like, drum machines are fucking awesome. You know, like early on. I remember, well, that's a long story. Anyway, I was like an early adopter of drum machines, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm a drummer. I didn't view them as like a rival. They were like a friend, you know, that I could make music with. And sometimes I played and sometimes they played, and it was fine. And as a drummer, playing along to drum machines is a great way to practice, you know, and learning how to program drum machines is a great way to mentally practice drum stuff. So very early on, we started putting that into Trans Am, and the crowd thing was a big influence. Phil got me into Can, right? Stuff like that. And so we just started mashing this shit together, you know, and we were lucky that there was a movement at the time which was called post-rock, which meant something different when it started. Now, like, I think people, when they hear post-rock, they think of like Tortoise.
Yeah, or like ISIS even.
Or ISIS. That's interesting that you say that, because I mean, when post-rock, when it was first used, it just meant mainly instrumental, kind of experimental rock music of any kind. Mm-hmm. That's what it meant. But for a long time, because Tortoise became like the prominent exponent, it started to mean things with dub and jazz and soundtrack influences for a long time, mm-hmm. which is not really what Trans Am is at all. Trans Am is like Van Halen meets Kraftwerk, sort of. Okay.
That's a great description. Wow, you just kind of blew my mind with that one, because I was sort of thinking similarly. There's like a maximalist quality to Trans Am to me. Like there's like a lot of playing going on, and sometimes it leans a little bit more muscular rock, but it's always kind of has a lot of like arpeggiation and like it's always kind of bubbling to me in one way or another. It could be the synth, it could be the guitar.
You know what I think our project was? I think our project was like, let's not let exciting sexually charged music, and I mean that in the most positive sense, let's not let that be owned by meatheads and jocks, right? Mm-hmm. Nerds can do that too. That was our attitude. We can make interesting, weird, experimental music, but it's still entertaining. That was the point. It was, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We can't let that be monopolized by the meatheads. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of like smart, talented musicians at the time were like, no, fun is lame. You know? And we're like, you're letting them win.
Yeah, you're letting them
win. Don't let them.
There's all these people over here having fun. Why can't we have fun in our context?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I always felt like when I heard Trans Am for the first time, I feel like also there was a sort of burgeoning post-punk movement that was happening. You guys sort of predated.
There was definitely a lot of that in there.
Yeah, and you guys kind of predated a bit of that stuff. but it always had this sort of danceable quality.
Yes.
And then when those things sort of met up, I felt like there was a good crossover moment for you to play with other sort of rock bands that were, you know, also maybe, you know, obviously Gang of Four, DC, you know, there was a lot
Gang
of
of Four is a big influence on us. I mean, look, if I were to say Kraftwerk, Van Halen, and Gang of Four, they all have something in common. They all have very hooky, danceable beats.
Sure.
And that's like, I don't think people think about that. They think that, oh, no, they're completely different. Actually, they're not. In that sense. You know what I'm saying?
You were bridging that gap in that thread, and that was always super interesting to me as a listener, because sometimes it's like, wow, this is like getting so like heavy. Like, you know, the drumming opens up and a little bit more tone in the guitar, and then but I'm like still with it, and then the next track it's just like this really beautiful sort of light arpeggiated synth, and it starts at different points, but I feel like the music consistently gets me to similar places, even though it doesn't take the same route over and over again, which I really appreciate. Could you talk about how you guys sort of write songs like that? Because they're not really your linear verse, chorus, verse kind of thing. So it seems like a jam, but it has to be more than that.
I think, I mean, I think what it was is I think that even though we took elements from, like, there's definitely moments, like going back to, like, let's say the Police or Van Halen, if you were to like take one of their songs and use just the drums and bass, that could be the beginning of like a Trans Am song, right? However, the attitude of like, this doesn't have to have a verse and a chorus and a bridge, that is something that we took more from the krautrock world, right? But it wasn't really like we heard that and we were like, oh, let's do this. It was more like a convergent evolution thing. But I think our attitude was like, whatever's happening is interesting and entertaining enough without needing to have a lead vocal and a chorus and a bridge. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of Trans Am songs that don't even have chords in them. They're just bass lines and beats and a melody over the top. A lot of them don't even have any harmony. It's very minimal in some ways. And so that was our thing. Is like, let's just be experimental in that way. Or like, let's just change the expectations of what makes a song entertaining or interesting to listen to. It doesn't have to be like a convoluted chord progression. There's 1,000 ways to make music interesting.
Totally. And also, it's also what, I guess, purpose it serves for the crowd and stuff like that too. You know, obviously, like if you take more DJ culture or that nature, and you take, you know, like you were saying, like Detroit techno, you take like a green, like Lanterns on Cashmere song, something like that. Yeah. And you're like, this music,
it has like 20 elements that go on for like 5 minutes, and it's perfect.
And it's like, it's the addition by subtraction.
It totally moves you, and it speaks to you. Do you remember the KLF?
Oh yeah, copyright liberation for life.
So I think they were the ones that wrote the book, The Manual. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, there was an amazing book. That book changed my life. But I remember there's a chapter, and I think the books are written like mid-90s maybe. Mm-hmm. But they're talking about like, there's a bunch of paragraphs where they're talking about like, there's a whole, you know, this is when like whatever second generation Detroit techno was happening, and they're like, there's people who are programmed just based from on the beat, and they're just playing with like how much reverb it has, for example, and that is enough and speaks to people enough that people are freaking out in a warehouse, thousands of people, you know, like you need to like sort of change your expectations of what is worthwhile in music and what the rules are. They change, and that can be enough, you know. Mm-hmm.
Definitely, and especially bringing it into a band context, I think a lot of it has to do with patience and willing to kind of commit to a process that does that, right? Like if I tell some of my drummer friends maybe to just be like, hey man, we're going to be on this hi-hat here, and we're going to just be here for 4 minutes.
See, I love that.
You do. Other people might not feel like playing like that, but where it could lead you is somewhere really different. And I think amongst your contemporaries, the people kind of that came up around with, it really stands out to me where I'm like, whoa, this band was really on some shit that was adjacent to a lot of things, but on its own sort of trip.
Do you know what I would say for any drummers out there? Like two drummers, Stuart Copeland and Jackie Liebensight from Cannes, are drummers that just play a groove for 5 minutes, and they're not doing fills that interrupt it, but they're total shredders. And those are important drummers to listen to because they never break the head bobbing vibe, but they're totally technically proficient, and they're also amazing musicians. Like, what they're playing is music. It's not like crazy like shred drums, but it's totally not easy, you know? So
and
that's funny, but just check out those drummers, and then you just playing a backbeat for 5 minutes with the little embellishments they put on a hi-hat or whatever is just awesome.
Totally. And those are the small things that really create the feel that it's sort of hard to qualify it when it doesn't seem so bombastic and easy to point out. But like over the course of the song, it's so much emotion, like you said, and little things that really can make you move. You know, an extra tick here that you just add in could create a whole new world.
Yeah.
And, you having a background, you know, growing up in Latin, you know, in South America, among a lot of Latin music and stuff like that, and bringing a lot of that even from your childhood subconsciously in, you feel that, you know. You go see a salsa band, there's one dude dancing and playing one wood block, and that motherfucker is important as fucking all hell to the vibe.
The
right?
clave has to be there for the entire song, pretty much.
Yeah,
it's the anchor that just keeps it all together, you know.
Exactly. So it's super important, and I feel that like in your drum style and kind of how you've sort of done that stuff. When Trans Am gets together to write songs, is it like everybody in the room?
So in the past, what we used to do in the past, so when we lived so here's what happened. So I guess there's a lot to talk about. After college, okay, the way we wrote, we used to own a recording studio in DC, which was an amazing experience. And there were a bunch of our albums that we recorded and produced ourselves in there, and Phil produced a bunch of albums for other bands. I engineered a bunch of albums for people. But it was like from Monday through Friday, we would show up every day in the studio. We would get high and we would jam. And we would just like roll tape or roll the programs. And then we would listen back and be like, this is awesome. These 5 minutes are good. Everything else sucks. It's fine, whatever. But we got a good 5 minutes, and then we would develop that idea. Mm-hmm. That's basically how we wrote for a long time. It wasn't really like, here, I've written a song. That's not really what we did. It was more like Phil would have like a chord progression, or to have like, here, let's use this beat for something, you know. Mm-hmm. But then later on, so maybe 15 years ago, more 16 years ago, Phil moved to San Francisco, partly to play with the fucking Champs, who are good friends of ours, and we did a lot of touring with. Awesome guys, an awesome band, and then Nate moved to New Zealand, where he still lives. So when that happened, the writing changed, obviously, because we weren't together. So then we started, you know, then people would start, like, I would show up with like, here's a beat and a bass line, or like, here's a beat and a keyboard pattern. Like, we would have to show up with more development, because we couldn't just start from zero. Because we would meet up and work for 2 weeks somewhere, you know. That's how we would. So at some point we had to start demoing stuff, and we all knew how to do that. We all had computers, and we all, you know. So it did change, and
because a lot of those records feel like jams to me, and then it seems like a little more songwritingness kind of came into it, but like the vibe was still you guys. It was tight, and I loved it.
Yeah, and by songwriting, I'm being very like, I'm talking like here's a cool bass line, here's an A section, here's a B section, and here's an outro. I'm not talking about like singer-songwriter.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
no, like,
that's and
like,
and, and I very early on became like I was the guy in the band who was like, let's use MIDI, let's use Pro Tools, whatever, you know. And so I've been using MIDI for whatever 20 years, and that really helped for me in presenting ideas, because I can play guitar and bass and keyboards, but I'm not really very good at any of them. And the thing with MIDI is I can think of a cool bass line and I can program it, and it shreds. It doesn't matter that I can't really shred. I just
yeah,
loop it and it fucking goes. And it was a good idea, and that's good enough, you know.
totally. And then also you're able to play drums to it and fully kind of develop the groove and be like, this is what I mean, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's so important, especially as sort of things evolve and do that. So, you know, obviously Trans Am's been around for a long time and has a great catalog. Everyone you got, if you know Sebastian mainly from his playing in Baroness and stuff like that. Trans Am, you'll find a ton of amazing, just great music of all different stripes, and really worthwhile, and you know, has put out a ton of stuff. But what I wanted to ask is, while Trans Am was sort of going, were you doing any other drumming kind of stuff that I may have not like heard about as much? And was
So
Publicist starting at any particular point? Like, give me like the
so I did
timeline.
so college. I did college, and then Trans Am was sort of part time. Then I did a year of grad school. I started a PhD in physics. And when I was trying to do a PhD in physics, Trans Am started touring and making records and selling records. And so I had like a crisis, and I was like, what the fuck am I going to do with my life? And I quit grad school, and I did Trans Am full time. And so that's a whole other story. But after that, then when Phil and Nate left DC, I decided I have one grandparent who was born in Britain, right?
Mm-hmm.
I went to Argentina when he was 5, but because of that really tenuous connection, I have a British passport, right?
Oh,
Yeah, pretty convenient. So I was like, Phil and Nate weren't in DC anymore. We sold our studio, so I had a little bit of money saved up. I didn't have a girlfriend, and I was just like, I'm just gonna go to fucking London, see what happens, right?
love it.
I didn't know anybody. I just moved to London, right? And that's when I played in a band. They were called Dead Kids, which was a great experience and really fun. And Dead Kids was kind of like a post-punk band. It was like, imagine, it was like, the rhythm section was like maybe like early Prince. It was very like, and then like the guitar was like just noise over the top of it. So it was a cool band. But after 5 years of living in London, so I was playing drums in that band, and that's also where Publicist started. Because the thing is that this is a whole complicated discussion about identity and subcultures. But dance music in America and in Britain is slightly different. Okay?
Yes.
Like, for example, like techno, as far as like dance music, I don't mean like craft work. I mean like club music techno. It's from Detroit. House music is from Chicago, right? But like the UK was like super early adopters, and that's the Summer of Love whole rave thing, right? And when it was still sort of an underground thing in the US, it like blew up in England, right? And so there, it's like, when I moved there, it's like everybody was kind of into clubbing, and they weren't like, it didn't have anything attached to it. It was just a thing. It didn't have any subculture attached to it. It wasn't.
And when it started,
it wasn't gay. It wasn't black. It wasn't white. It wasn't whatever. It was just clubbing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't like. I feel like in America, it was like either something like super cool and underground, or something douchey like a banker in some cheesy club trying to impress chicks.
I agree.
And in the UK, it was just like whatever. Like your cool friends who are graphic designers would go, to warehouse.
So it's very much, I feel like over there, you know, you had like Sasha and Digweed who really brought a lot of the culture in. And then also you had kind of like, you know, Acid House and things of that nature that kind of predated some of that. And it became to the point where like more people have like mixers and turntables than they have guitars at a certain point, right? So it just, for that country, it became mainstream culture.
Huge adopters of something that was created here, and they just fucking ran with it, right?
Yeah.
Which is cool. Whatever. So the thing is, when I was there, I would go to these warehouse parties, and I would hear these DJs, and I'm like, oh, it's just so much fun. I'm having so much fun. And then I was like, what are my skills? I know how to play drums. I know how to record, and I know how to program things, right? So I was like, why don't I do a project where I program the bass lines, I program the chord progression, and I play drums live. And that was the genesis behind Publicist. And so for a while, when I was living there, like in London, like I had a booking agent, and every weekend I would fly to Europe, and I would play Friday and Saturday, and I would travel by myself. And sometimes I would do longer tours, which were 3 or 4 shows in a row, and I would just take the train between cities in Europe. And I just had like a backpack with some electronic, and that was it. Like some triggers and a drum brain and some like whatever stuff I was using. And I would just play parties by myself as Publicist, and then I would fly back to London on Sunday night, and that's how I made money. That's how I paid the rent for like 4 years.
That's incredible. And also it's something really interesting for people to know too. Like if you're in a rock band, you expect to tour like every day of the week, right? Maybe a day
I only take weekends.
Yeah.
But
DJs, stuff like that, you're living for the weekend, right? And so there's that culture there, like, you know, is really, you know, you fly to the city, you fly back, and like it's like a domestic flight here too, right? You know, like
dude, with EasyJet and with Ryanair, it was like 20 euros to fly to like Barcelona from London. It was like crazy, you know.
Totally.
So
and how did you feel kind of occupying that space, right? Because first of all, you're alone, which that's way different. To be
it was fucking weird, dude. And I'll tell you what the positive is. This is something. The positive of doing this kind of solo tour is like when you're with a band, you're with your best buddies and your crew, and then you show up to the club, and what happens? You all hang out backstage, and you have 1 or 2 friends that show up to the show from whatever town you're in, and you have some beers, and then you hang out, and you're all hanging out together, and you don't fucking meet anybody because you're hanging out with your band and your crew and your 2 buddies, right?
Yeah, you're like a traveling circus. You like it's kind of an insane thing.
But when you're touring literally by yourself, it's like completely alone. You have to talk to the bartender. You have to talk to the sound guy. You have to talk to the promoter, and you meet like 20 people every night. You make way more friends, and you meet way more people. Because if not, you're just like sitting backstage by yourself, which is like insanely depressing, right?
Yeah, you're like, I'm in Belgium and I don't know fucking anyone here, and I might as well be a social animal.
So like you hang. It was so much fun. I met so many people. You know, what sucks though is of course like getting on an 8 a.m. Ryanair flight when you're like totally hungover after TV for like 2 hours.
Yeah, and it's not rock band time, right? Like Publicist is playing at like 3 a.m.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
It's like it's that sort of thing. And you know, I am a big fan of techno and industrial, and I make industrial music. And I truly enjoy all of that stuff in those cultures, and it's just pretty wild to hear friends of mine, like my friend Dom, who's Vatican Shadow, and he's like, I played at 7 a.m. in fucking Berlin, and then like I'm taking a flight somewhere else. I'm just like, dude, that sounds insane.
I have some pretty fucking crazy stories.
Yeah, totally.
We'll leave that for another time.
Another time. That's Saint Vitus Hours offline.
Yeah.
So you're doing all this stuff. You're in London. This is kind of the London period and stuff. When did you decide to come back to the States, and how did hooking up with Baroness sort of happen?
So I was in London for 5 years. And I loved it, and I still love London, and I still have really good friends there.
I love London.
But I was like, did I move here to become a Londoner, or did I move here to have an adventure? You know? And I was like, I think I moved here to have an adventure, you know? And my folks, they're not getting any younger, right? They're in DC. And I was like, and my dad had like heart surgery. He's fine, but he had a heart surgery when I was living there. And I was like, maybe I should move back home, you know, whatever. And then, I don't know. And then also, so I just became a U.S. citizen a year and a half ago, right? So, or something, I don't know. So anyway, so the point of telling you that is that I had a green card for most of my life. So when I was living in London, every time I would come back to America at the airport, they'd be like, "Are you living in London? Because we can take away your green card." Like I got threatened like every time I came back, right? So I was like, I'm kind of playing with fire here. Like I need to move back, get my citizenship, and then do whatever, you know?
Sure.
Because I don't want to like, I don't want to like, you know, this is where my family is. I don't want to like not be able to come back, you know?
Totally. And this is some real life shit. And this is like what we get into with the program, right? It's like, you know, being a musician, you're organizing your life around music, and the life part is very key. You know, some people have had to slow down for different reasons, or families, or jobs, education, competing interests, you know, like they're brilliant people who make brilliant music, but that's not what they do all the fucking time either, you know?
Yeah.
So seeing all those competing priorities, and for you, it was like, I need to become a citizen of this country, and I don't want to be far away from my parents, right?
Yeah. I mean, when I moved to London was the second time George W. Bush won. And I was like, I can't, what the fuck is wrong with it? I got to get out of here. But anyway, so I was like, I moved back to America, and I moved to New York because I was here all the time. I had friends here. I moved in with a friend of mine. He was just like, hey, I've got a room. Like, I didn't have to deal with the whole apartment bullshit. And a couple of years after living here, Baroness had that horrible accident I'm sure you've heard about. So
yeah.
they were in England. The brakes failed on a bus. They went over, like, it's not a bridge, but whatever. They went over, and, you know, everybody got pretty fucked up. And then Alan was like, the drummer was like, I don't think I can do this anymore, understandably. And then, so John Baisley, the singer in Baroness, you know, he's like the most driven person I've ever met. He's like 6 months after like flying through a windshield, no, less than that, 3 months after flying through a windshield, he's like getting back on the road or whatever, right? I need a new drummer, you know? And so he didn't want to do like the open audition thing because he, like me, he comes from a sort of like DIY background, right? Not like a professional showbiz studio musician background. So he just started putting feelers out. And one of my oldest friends from the DC area, he's actually from Baltimore, is John Theodore, the drummer extraordinaire. Okay?
That's a pretty good friend to have. John Theodore.
John, and he and I still talk all the time because he's that last friend of that. So John Theodore played in a band called Golden, which was Trans Am. Great band. That was Trans Am's sister band. We had Phil was in both bands, Phil Manley. So John Baisley called John Theodore and was like, hey, would you be interested in playing in Baroness, seeing what happens? And John Theodore had just been asked to join Queens of the Stone Age.
Good gig, John.
Good gig. Congratulations, John. Yeah. So John was like, call Seb Trans Am, because I know Trans Am's not that busy. So that's how we got in touch, and John and I started talking. Like the first phone call we had was like 2 hours, you know. And then I went down to Philly and met Pete and John. Like John was like, learn these 8 songs and come down in a week. And I was like, shit. And the thing is, like, at that point, like my drumming I was just doing a lot of Publicist. So my drumming at the time was like, dude, you know, like,
yeah,
my chops were like,
more on the floor, just like,
yeah. So I had to sort of like get back into like rock mode. But I learned the songs, and I went down to Philly, and I met the dudes, and it was just like, it didn't feel like an audition. John and Pete are just like, they're like guys in a band, like me, just like people in a band. They're like super friendly, whatever, dudes.
Totally.
And we played and we had a good time, and they were like, yeah, man, so we're going to go on tour soon. It's going to be fun, whatever. I was like, all right, I guess I'm in the band.
Just like that.
Just like that. Yeah. And it was fucking great.
I mean, not for nothing, Seb. I just want to pull this back that you did get a recommendation from John fucking Theodore.
I know. Thank you, John Theodore.
I know he's like your boy, and like we're gonna kind of. I'm gonna take it out of the context. And John Theodore is like, this is the guy. This is probably like a pretty good chance that you're gonna be, fitting the bill here.
I'm very glad John recommended me. I mean, but also John Baisley, he was a fan of Trans Am. I just think that a lot of people were like, Sebastian Thomson is the drummer in Trans Am. It's like one and the same, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, he's like drummer at large. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a very different thing as well, and especially with Publicist just doing all this great stuff on its own.
But that's a totally different world. You know what I mean?
Different, yeah, and that's also sometimes what it is too. Like, you are in that different world, and is like, is he going to be interested to come play?
Sure.
These sick, now kind of almost more rockish metal tunes with like these little proggy elements and like.
And dude, you know what? Look, I was like we talked about earlier. I was always going in and out of metal phases, and in the back of my mind, I was always like, one day I'm going to play in a heavy band. Like I always wanted to do that, and then I was like, fuck yes, dude, Baroness, awesome. I was so stoked,
Yeah.
And I was nervous. I mean, Alan's an amazing drummer. I was learning that shit wasn't easy,
Mm-hmm.
And but it was I was nervous, but it was cool and it was fun, and going on tour was so much fun, and playing with those dudes was great. And then Nick joined. He joined like maybe a month or two after I did. Similar process. And yeah, it's been fucking awesome. It's just like, I mean, maybe I'm spoiled. Like, I just think that I feel like playing in bands forces you to be able to deal with you. It's part of being in a band. You need to know how to compromise and discuss things and be friendly enough, and you can't be like a total basket case and be in a successful band.
Or it would be in the past tense. It was successful and then it's gone,
Yeah.
Because people can't hold it together.
Yeah. So my point is that it was pretty fucking smooth, I gotta say, the process,
Definitely. And do you think because John is such a strong sort of leader, he's obviously spearheading the whole sort of process? And honestly, when you think of Trans Am, I think of you a lot, because obviously there's not many drummers who are doing everything that you were sort of doing at the time with synths and triggers and everything else that you kind of brought to that. It felt very signature. When you think Baroness, you think from the art, you don't even have to see it.
You think John.
Done.
Yeah. And you know what? I gotta be honest with you. Like Trans Am was very much like a three-headed monster, and Baroness is a democracy, but we all understand. John started this band. People love John. I joined Baroness to give my whatever opinions, but I didn't join to take over and make it Trans Am Part 2. So it's nice to have a main thought creator for once, as opposed to Trans Am, where it was always what do you think? I don't know. It's
totally. To have that kind of songwriter that you really stand behind, where you're okay, I'm going to contribute to, building this whole thing, but we got a great architect, and so let's kind of see what you're constantly responding to a lot of what he's sort of bringing to the table, right? How was that?
The cool thing is also that he kind of lets me do whatever the fuck I want.
That's cool.
Honestly, I'm trying to think of, we've made 2 albums together now, and it's pretty much a lot of the way Baroness songs start is I just record grooves, and I send John 30 grooves, and he picks the 6 that he likes, and he writes chords and riffs over it. So whatever I end up playing, it's something. I mean, obviously, I always ask the band, "This is cool. You guys like this?" Obviously, but I'm pretty much playing what I wanted to play initially. Pretty much all.
Wow.
So that's a really nice thing, you know.
That's so different than I thought of the way that it would go, you know, where I'm like, oh, okay, like John probably is like got a bunch of stuff, and then you're like, okay, I'm writing my parts and I'm doing stuff like that. But the fact that you're sending him like a bunch of beats for him to maybe get inspired.
I mean, he is the initiator as far as like the pitched instruments for sure.
Sure, yeah.
You know, but he likes to have just a little bit of context, like. And when I send him stuff, it'll be a beat that I'll have like 4 variations and like 3 fills. Like it's a sketch, you know what I'm saying?
Got it. Yeah, but that's super cool though, and I think that you can see it start playing out in the style of the band really with Purple too, because I felt like you bring such of like when you talk about the drummers that really influenced you since you were a kid and stuff like that. You talk about this early Ozzy, you talk about Van Halen, and like it has that movement.
It's so uncool, but whatever.
No way, dude. To me, that shit is fucking tits. I love that music, you know. And to me, it also, even with like Randy Rhoads and his playing and the way that it would all play off, like all the hi-hat embellishments on like stuff, like I feel like it really moved you in a different sort of way. And I feel like when you joined Baroness, it moved in a different way. Like they were already making sort of this pivot a little bit to the rock thing.
Yeah.
But and like in like the Green and that you know, that time, and obviously you joined the band right after because of the accident, but it felt like a little bit more straight. And then when you kind of came in, it brought in a kind of a different kind of cadence and groove to those.
Well, I'm pretty sure that like Alan did that very intentionally on Yellow and Green. Like, because the early shit's pretty mathy. And
totally. Like Red is my favorite one. And
it might be my favorite too.
Yeah, I love Red, and the earliest stuff too. Even the first couple records are like totally nuts. And like Baroness fans, if you know, take a wide view of the band. It's an amazing journey. Like, if you be an adventurous listener, it's super cool. But the time that you joined, I was like, you brought back in a little bit of this movement, but it had more of like this sort of like classic rock and groove. And I was like way into that progression. I'm like, oh, okay, this has maybe some kind of ghosts of kind of what was a little bit, but with your kind of like element. I'm like, this.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was like, it's meant to be head bobbing, but also with cool details. That's kind of the objective, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like, not so like technical where it's distracting, but not so straight ahead that it's boring, you know?
Definitely. And I think that you keep that, like what you were saying before, that kind of like, hey, you know, if you play one groove or a couple of grooves, not too many throughout a song, but you kind of have the right kind of embellishments and moments in it as a drummer, you could really propel the song in like a beautiful way without being super obvious, like stuff, you know? You could do it just on a hi-hat and just be chilling in the cut, and you're like, yo, this is really cool. So, you know, what was it like once you actually were in the band and like just seeing your creations now come out and be like, wow, okay, I'm like in this band. I wrote a bunch of this stuff alongside these people who are also amazing. And now I'm like, I'm doing it, but I'm on, you know, 4 years ago, I was like in Barcelona playing like, you know, instrumental techno.
I mean, it's like, you know what? I'm just like, this might sound like a platitude, but I'm very thankful to the rock gods that I've been lucky enough to like pivot from one weird thing to another and been busy, you know? And so, I mean, I still do Publicist. I haven't done really a lot of touring with that recently. But yeah, but joining Baroness, I was like, I mean, come on, it's not very often that you get to play in one band that makes records and goes on tour, and then in the second one, you know, that's very lucky. And you know, totally, I was so stoked, so excited, you know, and still totally am. And but yeah, it was great. I love playing on stage with the Baroness people, with Nick and Gina and John, because like even if we're on tour and it's like day 40 and it's like you have a little bit of a cold, and as soon as we start playing, we're all like fuck yeah, you know. And sometimes people make fun of us for that, but we're just like, it's almost like kind of like childlike how stoked we get. We're playing, we're fucking playing on stage, like still to this day. I'm like,
And that's really great because you kind of need that, and because you live for that 1 hour or so, right? The other 23 hours in the day. Hey man, watch Fugazi's instrument. They'll show you. You know, they're just like, if you guys want the look at like just touring like that, you know. And I believe it was Ian MacKay's quote was something like that. It's like you're living your whole day for 1 hour, and you hope that hour is worth your time, you know. And he was talking about, you know, sometimes having a clunker in there or whatever he perceives that to be, you know. Ian, he got standards, man. You know, like, hey, we could play any of like whatever 1,000 Fugazi songs at any time. You're like, okay, relax, pal.
I mean, it's funny how like that's a lesson I learned a long time ago with Trans Am, was like the whole thing of like a lot of bands. I'm sure you know this, and a lot of people listening know this. Like you'll have like this like sort of like unplanned powwow after every show where you go over the show without even meaning to, and sometimes it's fucking pointless because it's like you'll be like, "Fuck, man, we fucking killed it! Oh god, we were so fucking good!" And then you hear a recording of the show, and you're like, "Oh my god, that was bad." And then likewise, you'll be like, dude, I hated that show. I felt so uncomfortable. Then you hear a recording, you're like, actually, we were great. So my point is that like, the experience is so subjective when you're on stage that sometimes I guess it's just not worth like reviewing the show, you know?
Yeah, and I think in this age of everything being recorded and everything like that, it's so easy. I have to be honest, I don't really like going back and watching shows or anything that I've honestly done, because I'm not really in a live show. Recordings, yes, I'll like listen back to stuff and be like, I really like that or whatever, but I'm not really trying, like, I'm trying to live in that moment, you know. Maybe, you know, years ago, maybe years have to pass by, like a good amount, where I find myself maybe looking back and I'm like, oh wow, that fucking happened 7 years ago, that's kind of crazy, or 10 years ago. But it's definitely true. And especially if someone comes up to you and tells you, man, you were great. And I was like, dude, I was dog shit. Like, what are you talking about? You can't possibly know. And maybe you were great. Who knows?
And sometimes it's just like, sometimes you just don't, you're not feeling good, like emotionally or physically or whatever, or you're hungover or you have a cold or whatever the fuck it is, you know, or sometimes the crowd sucks and you get self-conscious, you know, and
totally. The worst shows are the ones where you have those dialogues with yourself, and you're like, uh-oh, you know. You back, my man?
Sorry.
Yeah. So I was just
my phone freaked out for a second.
No, it's okay. It's all good. So I was just saying that sometimes it's like the worst shows are the ones you start getting a little bit in your head too, and you're like not feeling quite as comfortable, and you just don't get that runner's high, you know, that like thing, and then you're like, oh fuck, this guy looking kind of weird at me, and this motherfucker, and then it
gets like worse, and then it's like a feedback loop.
Yeah, it's fucking terrible.
But at least you have your bandmates with you on stage, because I've had those nights when I was doing the solo shows, the Publicist, and there's nobody, like when you're having when the crowd is shitty and you have your bandmates on stage, you can look at each other and kind of like shrug and laugh off. When you're by yourself and everyone's just like staring at you, you're like what am I doing here?
Drum kit in the middle of the fucking
of the dance floor. It's not good.
Oh wow, look at this. We have a message from my co-host Chris Enriquez, who said that Palmeiras is the champions of South America, and that's from Igor Cavallari.
I know, dude.
Mijo. He's out here talking soccer beats.
I know, dude.
This context?
Palmeiras knocked out my club, River Plate.
Yeah, no, you know, who's the there's a Colombian that plays for River right now.
Yeah. Fuck, I forgot his name. Yes, I know you're talking
Barrios. About. Midfielder, he's great. But yeah, and it's funny because I remember watching Chris's interview with Igor, and Igor actually you guys did that song together for Publicist.
Igor and I did a collaboration together.
Yeah, you know, a little like cross-town rivalry, you know, put together. But no, and he also talked a lot about being influenced by soccer and the cultures, you know, obviously he's Brazilian there and stuff like that. And I think it's all very evocative in both your drumming.
I think it's really interesting. Like I didn't I mean, I was always a fan of Sepultura, but I didn't really know about Mix Hell until more recently. And I just think it's just so interesting that we're both nerds in that way, you know. And like when we first started hanging out, like that's all he wanted to talk about. He didn't want to talk about like any rock thing related, you know.
Oh man, and like Pet Brick is so sick, and like I love Igor. If you're listening, we fucking love you. I love everything that he's doing, and you're right. We you know, you guys kind of charted very similar territories. And that, and like, even, you know, I feel like that's sort of a common thing, honestly, is, you know, people maybe move through rock music and then they get inspired by different music. And like, you know, there's something there, right? Like in London, for example, you have the whole hacienda progression, you know, from going to punk to post-punk to then, you know, acid and moving on to that. Here, you know, it's like punk, American hardcore, then Detroit techno and hip hop and things of those nature. And it kind of, you see how those things move, and it's interesting to see how people in underground kind of music kind of move through them all. And your story is definitely really inspiring and cool as to how you've done that. Many countries, many adventures, and all that stuff. What I wanted to sort of ask before we kind of wrap this up is like, what have you been working on lately? Have you been just jamming out Publicist tunes in your crib? What's happening with you today?
I'm not losing my mind.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
so you're right. It was Manchester. I'm so sorry. I misspoke. You're right. I said the hacienda was in London, like a
yeah. Manchester, yes. So the band did Baroness. We actually, at the height of the lockdown. So 2 of us are in Brooklyn and 2 of us are in Philly. And so at the height of the lockdown, well, first of all, we had to cancel an entire year's worth of touring, which really sucked. Like we were going to go to Japan, which I haven't been to in like 20 years. We were going to go to Australia, New Zealand. We're going to do a U.S. tour. We're going to do a European tour. And it was all like a domino thing, like one after another. I'm sure every guest has told you the same story of like, shit, everything got canceled last year, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. So, but what we did do, which is cool, is that we all have a little bare bones home studio set up. I'm very lucky that my rehearsal space is 2 blocks from my apartment.
Nice.
And my buddies that I share it with don't go as often as I do. So I can just, I mean, honestly, when we stop this, I'm going to go just fucking, like, I just go and put on Spotify and I just, that's all I do nowadays. That's literally all I do. But anyway, so the cool thing is that we did like we called it like File Friday, right? Where every Friday we would upload files to a Dropbox folder that we had. And I would upload drum beats, obviously, and everybody would upload guitar parts or bass lines or whatever. And then we would just like on Monday have like a Zoom and just like talk about which ones we liked and which ones we didn't and whatever. And so we've been working on new music, and we have gone together a couple times, and it's been a really cool way of working. I mean, obviously there's a downside to it, which is like you can't immediately play off each other. But there is a good side to it, which is sometimes when you're in the rehearsal space of your band, sometimes your ideas get like, maybe you don't express them well enough, or they get drowned out, or maybe you can't really play it well yet, you know? So when you do it like this, like I can, like, if I have an idea, I can like practice it for a week, right? Record it and then upload it. And it sounds good. As opposed to me just like trying something for the first time in the rehearsal space with the band. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. It's like there's you like have to get it good enough to commit it to recording.
Yeah.
Right. Like even in a raw sense, and then you're like you're far enough away for it where you could hear everything like literally piece by piece. So like if I'll be John, let me pretend like you could just. But you're like, I'm listening to this bass line tuned in, soloed out right now. And like in a rehearsal space, a lot of nuance gets lost, right?
And also, like, sometimes you'll have an idea, like, oh, I want to play this kind of groove, and you're playing it, and you think it sounds awesome, but maybe you actually haven't nailed it yet. And when you record it, you're like, oh, or maybe this is a bad idea. Maybe it's just a bad idea, you know. And you realize that when you've recorded it. So basically, last year we have like fucking like 40 demos at this point, you know.
Beautiful.
So I mean, there's nothing imminent being released, but we're definitely working hard, you know.
That's great though. That it's cool to be able to kind of take your time and be that productive because you aren't touring. So to fill it with productive time is also really really awesome. And have you been doing any recording as Publicist as well? Like
I have been. I started a band. I mean, I've released things on a lot of nice labels like Delayed Records, for example, Igor's. And also, I did a release a couple of years ago on Planet E, which is called Craig's label.
Which is so sick, dude.
It's totally sick.
That's like,
I was like, when I was
by the hand of God.
Like, Call Craig like mixed one of my tracks. I was like, fuck yes.
That's crazy.
But anyway, so I was like, you know what? Great experiences, but I'm just gonna fucking start a Bandcamp and just start uploading shit.
Great.
So that's what I'm doing now. I really like the last track I uploaded, which was a cool process because I took audio from video of me playing a festival in Portugal like 8 years ago, and I just looped some of the the GoPro on, which sounds shitty in a cool way, and then I just added new stuff over it, which was that was a cool process. But yeah, so I do upload stuff every couple of months, you know. So yeah, I've been like rehearsing a lot, recording shit, demos and ideas for Baroness, and uploading Publicist. And it's like, I don't know.
Keep making, and that's a beautiful thing. And when the world hopefully gets a little bit more online, so or maybe offline actually, we can go and enjoy this stuff. So everybody, go check out. Obviously, we'll just say that there's a new Baroness record imminently at some point, but
I wouldn't say I'd say it's we're working on shit. I mean,
we're working on it, and then there's great new Publicist stuff. Check it out. You'll be dropping stuff on Bandcamp, and also Trans Am has so many great records. I love the
and you
latest.
know what? Like maybe Trans Am will do something in the future. I hope so. I mean, the other two guys, like I said, one guy lives in San Francisco, the other guy lives in New Zealand. That makes shit a little bit hard. They both have jobs and they're married with kids and stuff, so they have less time than I do. But maybe hopefully we'll do something. You know?
Totally. And the fact is that you never know when you can get together and the moment strikes. But for us too, there's just you've blessed us with an awesome catalog. So Sebastian, thanks a lot for taking the time to chill. It's been super great, and I hope to see you at the bar sooner or later.
So I mean, are you guys doing the 35% capacity thing, or?
Oh, so for us right now, we're just chilling. We're gonna wait and see how things sort of go, and let's just say that we'd like to return with a little bit of glory. So we'll see how things sort of work out.
Make it an event. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'd love for people to enjoy Saint Vitus the way that it's meant to be enjoyed, and we're obviously talking about it, and we'll see how it goes. There's been a lot of back and forth as well. So we need to kind of like do something that makes sense and that hopefully can be solid, and for us to provide what we provide for our people, for our neighborhood, our community, and
I can't wait because I live down the street, so
yeah, man, I'm saying
really. I mean, I love my little apartment, but I gotta get out of here. You know what I'm saying?
Totally, for sure. Same here. Seb, thanks so much, man. I'll talk to you soon, all right?
Definitely. See you soon.
Later.
Bye.